In this webcast, we will take a closer look at the ESL/ELD programs and will provide an overview of the STEP resource. Case studies will be used to demonstrate how to use STEP within a classroom setting. Our learning goals for today are to gain a better understanding about students who require an ESL or ELD program, to develop an understanding of the STEP resource, and to use this resource to support classroom program planning and assessment. We will start with the Minds On activity to get us thinking about learners in the classroom. Focusing on our roles as educators and the idea of student advocacy, select one of the pictures on this slide that resonates the most with you. Write down 3 key words about how and why this image speaks to your thinking about student advocacy. In the last activity, you may have thought of inclusive practices that reflect on diversity, student academic levels and abilities, and the importance of making connections with students to understand their strengths and support healthy relationships. It is essential to keep this in mind when thinking about our English language learners, who come from many different backgrounds, and who can arrive at different points in the school year in any grade. English language learners are very diverse and can either be Canadian-born or newcomers to Canada. The following Venn diagram illustrates some of the different backgrounds of students, and while we can see that they all share the unique distinction of having a first language other than English, we can also see how diverse and rich their backgrounds are. There is great diversity within the student population, which will have a significant impact on learning needs. It's also important to remember that while students might need extra support in English language development, that they bring with them a wealth of experiences and knowledge that a teacher can tap into and use to support their learning, as well as enrich the experiences of all students in the class. It is critical that as teachers, we support students' identities and development as bilingual or multilingual learners. On the next 2 slides, we have broken down the differences between the ESL and ELD program. The ESL program, English as a Second Language, is for students who have had formal schooling but require English language support, whereas the ELD program, English Literacy Development, is for students who have gaps or no formal education and require both language and literacy support. Additional support is required for students in the ELD program, since many of them are experiencing school for the first time. Language acquisition is the key focus for English language learners. This refers to the following language skills: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. These skills can be further divided into receptive, input skills, reading and listening, and expressive, output skills, writing and speaking. The receptive skills typically develop first, but all 4 skills work together simultaneously. Students therefore need tasks and opportunities that integrate and balance all 4 skills to develop their English proficiency. To help better understand the progression of this language development, the Ministry of Education has developed the STEP resource. Students who are English language learners are learning English at the same time they are learning the curriculum. STEP was designed to develop a set of language development continua for students learning English to help educators determine a starting point for instruction, track language proficiency, identify learning needs, and implement differentiated instruction and assessment. An ESL/ELD teacher or reception center assessor will place students on the initial STEP continua. The classroom teacher will use the ongoing STEP continua to continue tracking the student's language development. Note, if there is no one in your board to do an ESL/ELD initial STEP assessment, you can use the ongoing STEP assessment to place your student. In this presentation, we are focusing on starting points for classroom instruction and assessment. Here's an overview of the STEP assessment process. The initial STEP assessment data is used as a starting point to locate your student on the ongoing STEP continua. We will use this as a point of reference to demonstrate the STEP assessment process. Let's begin with the starting points for instruction. For most teachers, an initial assessment will have been completed on or shortly after your newcomer student has arrived. The teacher will receive information about a student's step level. A great place to start to understand the overall context of this step is to look at the STEP ESL profiles. These have been developed for reading, writing, and oral, which includes both speaking and listening. The ESL profiles provide a general overview of a student's language proficiency at the end of each step. They describe, within a context, what a student can do. Students who are English language learners are learning English at the same time they are learning curriculum. STEP was designed to develop a set of language development continua for ELL students to help educators determine a starting point for instruction, track language proficiency, identify learning needs, and implement differentiated instruction. The ongoing STEP Continua is a resource to assist the classroom teacher with program support and assessment of English language learners. It also documents the progression of English language proficiency based on daily instructional activities as observed across the curriculum. Looking at the continua for writing, you will notice that there are various components to the continua. Let's start by analyzing what each component means. First, we have the element, which is along the left column. It is used to name and describe the given language concepts or skills that make a connection to the Ontario curriculum. These elements will look familiar to teachers as they are based on the overall goals found in the language curriculum document. Next, we have the step level. There are 6 ESL steps. These steps represent developmental language skills and take approximately 1 year to complete. It typically takes a student 5 to 7 years to develop English language proficiency. However, language development can be a bit messy and doesn't always follow a neat linear progression, which means students can be on different steps in reading, writing, and oral strands. Next, we have the descriptors, or observable language behaviors, which identify what a student can do. It captures distinct language behaviors that can be observed across the curriculum through daily instructional tasks. The observable language behaviors, OLBs, are important because they allow for ongoing assessment of student learning, track language acquisition, and help with planning for instruction and assessment. It supports the progress of English language acquisition and inform programming decisions for English language learners on the reading, writing, and oral scale. They also serve as the primary assessment and tracking tool of the STEP resource. As stated, the observable language behaviors continua have 2 main purposes. One is to inform programming, and the other is to track the student's language proficiency. Teachers use the descriptors in the OLB continuum to determine what a student can do and what the next steps are to improve language proficiency. Teachers highlight and date the STEP descriptors when they observe a student consistently demonstrating this behavior. Each school board has its own way of doing this. Some school boards maintain a hard print copy of the STEP continua for each student, while others use an electronic format. A student's STEP level is determined when a student has completed all the descriptors for that level. In this example, the student has completed all the Step 5 descriptors in reading, so the student is a Step 5 in reading. There is also a STEP continua for students in the ELD program. This continua has OLLBs, which are called Observable Language and Literacy Behaviors, since students are having to learn both the language and literacy at the same time. The ELD continua has 4 steps instead of 6 steps. After students complete ELD Step 4, they transition to ESL Step Continua, usually around ESL Step 4. It typically takes students 7 to 9 years to complete the ELD and ESL steps. Students are placed in the ELD program starting at grade 3 if they arrive without having had any formal schooling. The program supports grades 3 to 12. See the Ministry of Education document, Supporting Students with Limited Prior Schooling, for further information. Learning skills play a key role in school and support academic development and growth. Students in the ELD program usually have not had an opportunity to access or develop specific learning skills that are required for success in Ontario schools. In order to promote growth and success in these areas, students are tracked and monitored on a continua called Orientation to School Life. The key components of this continua are learning skills. These are identified horizontally across the top and are the same as those used on the Ontario Provincial Report Card. Descriptors describe behaviors that can be observed in a variety of settings. Not all are stranded across all 4 levels. Scale. The scale runs vertically down the far left column and is divided into 4 levels: developing, building, consolidating, and sustaining. For most students in the ELD program, these skills will need to be explicitly taught, reinforced, and monitored until students are able to sustain these skills on their own. Some of these skills may be extremely challenging for students experiencing trauma. It's important to familiarize yourself with the impact of trauma on learning when working with any student with a trauma background. It is important to keep in mind that when using either step continua, that the teacher records factual observation. This should be done objectively as possible without judgment. As with any form of observational data collection, teachers should avoid personal interpretations or impressions and focus on objective facts. For example, indicating that Santa was engaged in the reading makes an evaluative statement. However, noting that Santa used her finger to track each word on the page as she read provides factual information. While in this webcast we are focusing on the benefits of STEP for classroom use, there are a number of other key benefits to using this framework. This slide outlines some of the other benefits of STEPs for students and teachers. Now that we are familiar with the what and the why of STEPs, we are now going to focus on the how. What does STEP look like in your classroom? We are going to look at a grade 5 case study. This case study can be found in section 3 of the Supporting English Language Learners grades 1 to 8, page 74. Note that these case studies were written before the STEP resource was developed, and for our purposes today, we have adapted these case studies to align with the STEP level. We suggest that you refer to this case study example for more details and information about what a unit adaptation looks like. This case study sample looks at a grade 5 social studies unit with cross-curricular connections to language. We will be looking at 3 different language learners and using their STEP levels to accommodate or modify their program and assessment based on their language needs. The STEP Continua supports the curriculum goals of units being taught, but we must also keep in mind that there are language goals and social goals. The language goals consider students' STEP and the language and literacy demands of the content areas, whereas the social goals build on the inclusive learning environment and define the nature of the interaction. When we consider the social goals, we must focus on the oral language and the metacognition in the curriculum goals. Social goals are key in the developmental phase and may address inclusive learning environment, social-emotional supports, conversational social language supports, and how the nature of the learning interaction will unfold. The lesson that we'll be focusing on consists of a few curriculum expectations being covered in social studies and oral language strands. These overall expectations are: in the social studies, students will use a variety of resources and tools to investigate characteristics of a number of early civilizations, including their significant innovations and technological advances. In language, for the oral strand, students will use speaking skills and strategies appropriately to communicate with different audiences for a variety of purposes. The chart on this slide shows some of the background information about each student and establishes which step the student has completed. Benjamin is on ELD Step 1. Minsu is on ESL Step 2. And Olesa is on ESL Step 5. We need to start here. Each school board will have its own process for how this information is shared with the classroom teacher. It may be shared with the teacher by the ESL/ELD teacher, or it may appear directly on your class list. You will need to check with your principal to see how this information is shared at your site. Please take a moment to read each student profile. Now that we know which step the students are starting on, we can look at the ESL oral profile to provide context for programming and assessment. The profile provides a general overview of the student's language proficiency at the end of each step, and some of the strategies required to access a student's academic and English language strengths. Please note that Benjamini has not been included here because at this time there are no oral language profiles available for ELD steps. Please take a moment to read each oral language profile. We will look at 3 students and the oral expectations for this unit. This slide shows where these students are placed on the ESL step for oral language. We will need to keep these observable language behaviors in mind when we look at the oral language expectations for this unit. The curriculum expectations states 2.3. Communicate orally in a clear, coherent manner, presenting ideas, opinions, and information in a readily understandable form. The chart on this slide shows where Mingsu and Alessa are on the ESL step continua for oral language proficiency. Teachers can use this information to individualize their programming and assessment practice to best meet the needs of these students. The chart on this slide shows where Benjamini is on the ELD step continua. The OLLB describes the English proficiency and literacy of ELLs who have limited schooling and gaps in their education. These students require an ELD program. When students within this program reach ELD Step 4, they will be placed on the ESL Step continua, usually around ESL Step 4. Students in this program will have a wide range of experiences, and there are many opportunities for teachers to make connections to their lived experiences. This chart shows where Benjamini is placed on the orientation to school life. The orientation to school life continua is used with students on the ELD continua. It can be used by teachers to help develop social goals for the student. Some English language learners will require modifications to the curriculum expectations. Modifications are necessary as they support ELLs to achieve curriculum expectations and meet course requirements. As educators, we have to provide tasks that allow students to demonstrate their knowledge in a medium that is manageable for them. ELLs may possess this knowledge in their language. It is up to us to provide appropriate outlets for them to demonstrate this. Modification is defined in the Growing Success document on page 150 as a meeting of the learning needs of a student by making changes to the grade level expectations for a subject. Changing the number and/or complexity of the subject expectations or using expectations from a different grade level are examples of modifications that can be made for ELLs. With modifications, it is important to keep in mind that expectations must be realistic, specific, observable, and measurable. They must describe specific knowledge and/or skills that the student can demonstrate independently, given the appropriate modifications. Accommodations are the instructional, environmental, and assessment changes that the teacher makes in order for the students to learn and demonstrate their learning of the curriculum expectations. Most ELLs will require accommodations for a significant period of time to support their English language development. Teachers will need to differentiate the content, process, product, and/or environment to engage and leverage the students' strengths to support their learning. We will now move into the culminating task. The task for this lesson involves students making presentations about the research based on their artifact, first to their classmates and then to a public audience, such as students from other classes and visitors. The task will consist of language expectations, including 2.3, communicate orally in a clear, coherent manner, presenting ideas, opinions, and information in a readily understandable form. We will be focusing now on how the curriculum expectations can be modified with the STEP OLBs. First, we start by looking at the curriculum expectations, in this case, the oral expectation. Next, we match this to Minsu's ESL Step 2 oral language behaviors to see what he can do and what he is working toward. The next step is to modify the expectations for the student by combining both the curriculum expectation and OLB. When creating the modified curriculum expectations, you should include specific strategies. Let's walk through the process. We have listed the oral expectation being covered, which is 2.3. Communicate orally in a clear, coherent manner, presenting ideas, opinions, and information in a readily understandable form. We will focus on expectation 2.3. Now let's take a closer look at Minsu's ESL Oral Step 2 descriptor. To help with this, we can deconstruct the descriptor into two parts. The first part of the descriptor states how the student will respond. In this case, Minsu can use a small range of personal and academic words and phrases. The second part of the descriptor states how the student will apply this. In this case, Minsu can make and respond to requests in familiar situations. After comparing Minsu's OLB with the curriculum expectation, we can see that no modifications are necessary. Minsu's oral language proficiency will allow him to participate successfully. However, he will require accommodations such as being allowed to use more visual aids in his presentation, as well as having multiple opportunities to practice his oral presentation with classmates or teachers. It is important to note that even though there are no modifications, you may still modify and differentiate oral rubrics to assess his language proficiency. As students become more proficient in English, there are less differences between the STEP OLB and the curriculum expectation. This is evident with ALESA. Let's look at Oral Expectation 2.3 and ALESA's OLB Oral Language Descriptor. Again, we can deconstruct this descriptor into two parts. The first part of the descriptor states how the student will respond. In this case, ALESA can use an expanded range of vocabulary. The second part of the descriptor states how the student will apply this. In this case, ALESA can contribute to classroom activities and can effectively convince or persuade. After comparing ALESA's OLB with the curriculum expectation, we can see that no modifications are necessary. However, she should be provided with the following accommodation. The teacher should conference with ALESA to review her presentation to ensure correct use of academic vocabulary and subject-specific terminology. Benjamie is in the ELD program and is on ELD Step 1 for oral language. Let's look at the Oral Expectation 2.3 and Benjamie's OLB Oral Language Descriptor. Again, we can deconstruct this descriptor into two parts. The first part of the descriptor states how the student will respond. In this case, Benjamie can use familiar words. Since Benjamie is on the ELD continua, he is likely to have had limited number of familiar words, and these words will be those that are personally relevant and relate to basic social communication. The second part of the descriptor states how the student will apply this. In this case, Benjamie can use these words in phrases and simple sentences to express meaning. By analyzing the oral curriculum expectation and the STEP OLLB, we can see that Benjamie will require modifications to the curriculum expectation. A modification that meets Benjamie's level of English language proficiency would be: Benjamie will communicate orally using short, rehearsed words and phrases with visual supports. For example, Benjamie could utilize graphic organizers and key visuals to share and organize his key ideas. This would enable him to scaffold his learning and successfully complete his oral presentation. Accommodations will also have to be put into place to further support Benjamie. In this case, the following accommodations would be required. Benjamie will use a graphic organizer provided by the teacher with sentence starters and visuals to scaffold his oral presentation. He will also have multiple opportunities to present to peers and the teacher. His final presentation will be done within a small group context. It is also important for Benjamie to have a social goal in place. The ELD Orientation to School Life Continua is a useful resource to refer to for this. The teacher should look at where Benjamie is on the continua and what he is working toward. In this case, Benjamie will be working toward using class time to complete tasks with constant support and affirmation. This will help Benjamie to take risks and become a more independent learner. In the STEP resource, it is important to note pages 27 and 28. Here you will find the list of oral, reading, and writing strategies, that you can use when you're creating your modified expectations. An emphasis must be placed on the texts that are chosen to support ELLs on the STEP continua. Students must be able to make connections and draw from their experiences. When ELLs are able to relate to the text, the process of rich and authentic learning occurs. Special consideration needs to be given to text selection for students in the ELD program. These students are new to both literacy and learning a new language. When choosing texts, it is important to ensure that they relate to the student's background knowledge and experiences, the student's culture and family situation, the student's language proficiency, not necessarily the grade level, the student's first language literacy, content that is age appropriate and enables the student to make connections with the text, and a broad range of text forms, such as picture books, news articles, websites, graphic text, charts, posters, and blogs. In regards to instruction and assessment, evidence of student learning must be documented. The documented information can then be used with the OLB to determine what the student has accomplished and achieved in language proficiency and academic strengths. Teachers can use the OLB to place the student and plan for new learning goals and next steps. This is a continuous cycle that constantly monitors the student's English language proficiency. Triangulation of data is a process by which teachers collect evidence about student learning from multiple sources. Data can be collected through conversations, observations, and products. Teachers will need to draw on an English language learner's strengths and use them to provide opportunities to gather data in various ways. The flow chart illustrates the complete STEP assessment process that we have explored in the preceding slides, starting with initial assessment and ending with the instruction and assessment process. This STEP assessment process is important because it provides support in the following ways. Although in this webcast we have focused primarily on the first 4 of these, you can see there are many other advantages to using the STEP resource. As we wrap up, here are 3 things to keep in mind when working with English language learners. You need to know which program the student requires, ESL or ELD. Use the ongoing STEP continua to support classroom program planning and assessment, and implement modifications and accommodations to support the English language and literacy needs of the student. The following resources were used in the creation of this webcast. We thank you for watching the webcast and hope that you can utilize the STEP continua as a tracking, monitoring, program planning, and assessment tool.